Hello, my little weirdos. My name is Becca. Welcome back to my channel. And today we've got a really good case for you. This is one of my favorite serial killers to talk about. I think his background is fascinating. I think his kills are fascinating. I think how his career ended is fascinating, and how he spends his remaining years in prison is interesting. So if necrophilia and decapitation and kidnapping and 6'9" geniuses are something you're interested in, then stay tuned because you are going to love this video.
In 1972 and 1973, a series of murders shocked Northern California. College girls began to disappear.
There were actually 3 active serial killers in Northern California at the time. Bodies were turning up with no heads, no hands, sexually assaulted, mutilated, and they were turning up everywhere. Then one day, police get a phone call from one of their friends confessing to all of the murders, including the decapitation, sexual assault of his mother and her best friend. This is the disgusting case of Edmund Kemper. December 18th, 1948, in Burbank, California, Clarnell and Edmund Kemper Jr. give birth to their second of 3 children, Edmund Kemper III. Now, Clarnell was not a great mom, or a good wife, or a nice lady just in general. Ed's father, who was a World War II vet, would say about being married to Clarnell that dealing with suicide bombings and nuclear testings was more enjoyable than being married to Clarnell. Clarnell was verbally very abusive and degrading to both her husband and her son. She treated her daughters pretty well. She kind of just didn't like men was the problem, and she was not afraid to let them know. She was not nice to Edmund, and she did not coddle him. She said that was because, and I quote, "I don't want to turn him gay." So she treated him like shit. Apparently that prevented gayness. I don't know. There are stories of him decapitating his sister's toys and cutting off their hands, which psychiatrists would say was an indication of his future crimes, as he would decapitate his victims and cut off their hands. But if you listen to Edmund talk about it, he looks at it a little differently.
I had a cap gun. It was by Mattel, right? Fanner 50. It was a very fancy cap gun. I got it in New York City. I went there for one summer with a cousin. And when I came back, my sister was kind of jealous, my little sister. For years, I never really put any value on what happened. Tried to, figure out beyond the obvious what happened in this scenario. But I've since found it plausible to believe that when she was angry or jealous about something, she would fuel her attitude toward resolving something. She hated that cap gun because it came between us as brother and sister. It was something I had that she didn't have. That trip represented something she really wanted, she didn't get, and I did. But very soon after getting back from that trip, she got in an argument with me. It was over something really petty. She got really outraged. She picked up that cap pistol. I said, "Don't throw that." And she threw it right at me. Wham, hard. It hit the floor and my toe, and it hurt bad. But it broke the gun, the inner mechanism. It wouldn't work after that. I picked it up, I found that out. It wouldn't cock and pull the trigger anymore. And that really outraged me. So I said, "So you want to play like that, huh?" So I go running into her room. She says, "What are you doing? What are you doing?" She's shrieking and chasing me, right? So I run into her room and I grab up her Barbie doll. It was the one fancy doll she had, the Barbie doll. Everybody has one, right? She had a pair of sewing scissors sitting there and a sewing machine, a sewing kit. I grabbed the scissors out. The head didn't decapitate, it pops off. So I popped that off. I said, "Well, that's going to go right back on. That's no damage." So I took the scissors and I cut the hands off the doll. I said, "Here, now you got a toy that doesn't work too good. I got a toy that doesn't work too good." That was my attitude. It wasn't quite just me going and, dismembering her doll. Again, I think that's a little bit too quick an assignation. It's not me to judge these professionals, but when they look at me here on Monday morning after the football game and they say, "Gee, here's all these little parts of the puzzle," oh, this indicates what he was going to do. And if that's the case, I want to know about the teenage kid or the preteen kids and the puberty, the pre and post puberty kids. They're going through these raging moods and attitudes. that go out and kill neighborhood cats. They hang them up from a telephone pole or hang them up from a tree, shoot them full of arrows and set fire to them. I was reading about that in Dear Abby. Where are those children today? Are they serial killers? Or are they police chiefs and mayors and aldermen and assemblymen?
Around this same time, he would go to a magic show where he would watch the magician cut the head off of a pretty young girl. It was just a magic trick. Obviously, her head didn't come off, but he found himself getting extremely excited.
That when I was young, I was about 8 or 9 years old, I went to this little come-on. It was like at a record store or something, and they had this crowd of kids there, and there was a magic show. And this guy, you've probably seen it, the fake guillotine, hand pressed, and they put the potato there, and someone puts their neck in the brace, and they slam this thing down, and the potato down below chops in two, but the person's head doesn't fall. And he wanted to volunteer out of the audience, and some quite beautiful little 16-year-old girl gets up there, and it's a big laugh, and you're all giddy and stuff. And I started getting caught up in this. I said, wow. Right at that moment, I departed reality, because logically, I should have been able to ascertain that that could not happen. You're not going to get away with chopping somebody's head off in the middle of, in the middle of Helena, Montana, the capital city. But the concept of it was so raw and it was titillating. I says, wow, gee, I gotta watch this.
He's also cutting the heads off of cats, burying them alive, stabbing them to death. He was having quite the interesting moment in his childhood. In the 2nd grade, he began stalking his teacher. He would tell his sister that if he wanted to kiss her, he would have to kill her. He had a fantasy world where everyone was either dead or an inanimate object, and he could just live his life and do what he wanted without being judged by others. He was judged a lot when he was a kid because he was a huge, very, very tall kid, and all of the kids teased him for this. One time, while following his teacher home from school, she noticed that he was carrying his father's bayonet with him. By 54, Ed's dad has called it quits. He leaves the family. He has had enough of Clarnell, and he leaves the 3 kids alone with her. She becomes a raging alcoholic and adds physical abuse to the verbal abuse and fixates completely and solely on Ed. He must have reminded her of her ex-husband, and she took out all of the rage on him. By the age of 15, he was 6'4". He was a huge young man, and maybe his mom was a little bit afraid of him, and he had to sleep in the basement. His sisters and his mom slept upstairs, and at night he was forced downstairs. Now, the basement wasn't a bedroom, it was just a basement filled with storage and boxes and a cot with a sleeping bag. And that's what he had to sleep on. He would admit later that he was actually terrified of the basement and developed weird rituals that he thought would keep him safe down there.
I was there about 6 months in that room, and I developed some very, very particular and articulate rituals that I felt I had to go through to protect myself. I was, again, it's embarrassing. I was a youngster, and if you can imagine me going down a staircase of rough-hewn wood, there's no guardrail, so one step wrong and you're off into this black pit. I turn on the light. It's a little circular light switch, and a single naked bulb goes on down at the bottom of these stairs. Okay, so I turn that light on, I open the door, I close the door because my mother complains of the cold coming in from the basement. I go down the stairs, I get to the bottom, I do a 180-degree turn, and I walk the full length of the house on this floor with these pipes rattling and wheezing and banging over my head. It's pitch black ahead of me, and the only light is behind me hanging down from the ceiling. I'm now cut off from the house, cut off from them. I walk this full length into the darkness, from this gradients of light into complete darkness, groping around in the dark. I do about a 45-degree angle when I get to the end, and I pull the string and it lights up this end. And then I'm supposed to walk all the way back to the other end, turn that light off, and now walk toward the light from the dark. And I've got this horrible terror going on inside of me. And this is every night. This is every day because it's pitch black down there, no windows. She didn't intend all of this. And when I sniveled about it, when I complained and I cried about it, I got smacked in the head. You know, what's the matter with you? Quit being such a wimp.
She said that he had to sleep in the basement because she was afraid that he was going to molest his sisters. Maybe she got a vibe from Edmund that, might have had some truth to it. Hi guys, so I'm editing this footage that I filmed yesterday, and I noticed that a chunk of the story is missing. I don't know how that happened, but it did, and so I'm here adding it back in. Now I know that the background is different, my hair and makeup is different, and I apologize for that, but I wanted to make sure that you guys didn't miss any of the story. So one day, after a large fight with his mom, Edmund runs away. He goes and he finds his father, and he stays with them for a while with his new wife and his stepbrother, and it works for a while, but Edmund makes his stepmom uncomfortable, and his dad gives him the boot. But instead of going home, he goes to live with his grandparents. That environment isn't any better. His grandma is exactly like his mom, and his grandfather has dementia. But it's not all bad. Grandma and Grandpa give Ed some guns and tell him that he can go out into the property and shoot as many squirrels and raccoons as he can. Until one day, Ed uses those guns for something else. August 15th, 1964, Edmund gets in a fight with his grandmother after his grandfather leaves, and he shoots her in the head 3 times. Grandpa comes home. Edmund panics, thinking, I don't want to hurt Grandpa. I don't want him to see that his wife has been shot, so he goes outside and shoots Grandpa in the face. Immediately following the crimes, he calls his mom to tell her what he has done. She tells him, you call the cops or I'm going to call the cops in. Edmund calls the cops. He's, of course, arrested, and when the cops ask him, why'd you shoot your grandparents? He says, I just wanted to know what it felt like to shoot Grandma. Edmund is admitted to a state hospital where he is given an IQ test, and this is when we find out that Edmund has an IQ of 136. He's a certifiable genius. He does very well at this hospital. He's diagnosed with paranoia and psychosis. He learns the language of treatment. He actually starts working in the hospital, administering tests to the patients. He will remember the answers to these tests so that when he takes them, he scores higher. He became good friends with a lot of the serial rapists in the ward. He would listen to their stories of rape and murder and abuse, and he would get very excited by these stories. He was learning from them. He learned that you don't leave survivors and you don't leave witnesses. He would listen to how they got caught, taking note so that maybe later he could use that information. 5 years later, in '69, he is released from the hospital. The hospital insists that he does not go back and live with his mom. He goes back and lives with Mom. While he was living with her, he had to do monthly check-ins with the courthouse, and every time they would check him off as being healthy and normal. He would move in and out with his mom, coming back when he needed money, but all in all, he seemed to be okay. He seemed to have recovered from the incident, and since he was 21 when he was released, his record was completely expunged. Now, Edmund really wanted to be a cop. He actually applied for the police academy, but he was too tall. At 6'9" and 300 pounds, he was too much man for the cops, and they turned him away. He didn't take this well. He wound up buying a motorcycle. Later, he would get in an accident on that motorcycle and be injured. Some stories say it was a head injury. Other stories say it was an arm injury. Either way, he walked away with a $15,000 settlement, which he used to buy one of those refurbished cop cars, you know, the ones that pull up behind you and you think you're being pulled over. He also liked to hang out at a local bar where all of the cops would go after work, and he would listen to their stories of heroism, and he became very good friends with the police force, even though he couldn't be on it. Once getting this car, he started picking up hitchhikers. He would refine and practice looking trustworthy, respectable, someone that you would feel safe getting in their car and letting them drive you around. Then on May 7th, 1972, Ed picks up 2 18-year-old girls, Mary Ann and Anita, under the pretense of taking them to Stanford. He drives for about an hour without them noticing that he's to change directions. He drives them out to a wooded area of Alameda that he is familiar with because of his work with the highway department. He plans to rape these girls, but he remembers from his conversation with the rapists when he was in the hospital to leave no witnesses. So he puts Anita in the trunk and handcuffs Mary Ann. He strangles and shoots her. At one point, he recalls brushing her breast with the back of his hand, and it actually embarrassed him. He said, "Oops, I'm sorry," even though he killed her minutes later. He then would shoot Anita in the trunk. On his way home, with both girls stuffed in his trunk, he's pulled over by a cop for a broken taillight. The cop obviously doesn't suspect that there are 2 dead 18-year-old girls in his trunk and lets him go.
I thought I was pretty slick and went and tripped all over myself. That first 2 murders, the first 24 hours, there were 3 clear times I should have been busted, and I wasn't, because 3 different individuals or 3 different groups of people got scared and minded their own business and looked the other way.
He takes the bodies home because his roommate isn't there. He has sex with the corpse, decapitates the bodies, takes their heads in their hands, and disposes of them. On August 15th, Marianne's head and hands are found by the side of the road. Anita's remains have never been found. On September 14th, 1972, Aiko Ku is walking to her dance class. I apologize if I mispronounced that name. I'm not good at pronouncing names. She's walking to her dance class when she is picked up by Edmund. He takes her out to a secluded area where he plans to rape and kill her, not in that order, and he has her at gunpoint and somehow manages to gain her trust. So when he locks himself out of the car with the gun, the keys, and the girl on the inside, even though she has every opportunity to escape, she lets him back in. He then strangles and rapes her and stuffs her in the trunk. On the way home, he decides he wants a drink, and he goes to the cop bar and has a couple of drinks with the police, her body in his trunk. Once he leaves the bar, he's feeling pretty invincible at this point, and he opens the trunk in the parking lot to look at the body like a fisherman looking at his catch. He goes home, he decapitates her, has sex with the body, then puts the head and her hands in like a plastic bag and takes it out. He then goes to a court-appointed meeting with the girl's head and hands in like grocery bags in his car. He goes to this meeting and he gets cleared as being normal. He's all right. He's safe. And he then goes and disposes of the body parts. January 19th, 1973, he again kidnaps a girl while she is hitchhiking, shoots her, and then hides her in his room. He decapitates her, he takes her hands, he has sex with the dead body, then he buries her head in his mom's garden looking up at her bedroom window. He would say later, jokingly, that she always liked it when people looked up to her. After a fight with his mother, he swore that he was going to kill the next pretty girl that he saw, so he went to the college.
I was picking up some very lovely young women. You know what we were talking about as we're driving around? Almost as often as not. This guy that's going around doing this stuff. And the second they started talking that, they didn't realize it, but they were getting a free ride. I couldn't touch that with a 10-foot pole, I swear. You know, but they'd be telling me all about this guy, and they're comparing notes and speculating on what he looks like, how he carries himself, why he's doing this stuff, telling me about it.
And this is where he came across the paths of Alice and Rosalind. He would murder them, he would rape them, he would dispose of their dismembered bodies. April of 1973. Edmund and his mom get in a large altercation, and he decides that he has had enough. Once she goes to bed, Edmund bashes her head in with a ball-peen hammer.
I knew a week before she died I was going to kill her. And she went out to a party, she got soused, she came home, went to sleep. I was woken up by that, came out, I walked up to her bed, she's laying there reading a paperback, as many thousands of nights before. And she said, "Oh, I suppose you're going to want to sit up all night and talk now." Shit. And I looked at her, I said, "No." I said, "Good night." And I knew I was going to kill her, you know? And I'm so cold, it's so hard. And that's the first time in 10 years I've looked at it that way. I mean, that intensely, that honestly. It hurts. Because I'm not a lizard, I'm not from under a rock. I came out of her vagina. See? I came out of my mother. And in a rage, I went right back in. For 7 years, she said, I haven't had sex with a man because of you, my murderous son. This is one of our arguments. I cut off her head, and I humiliated her corpse. It's there, you know? A 6 young woman dead because of the way she raises her son and the way her son is raised, the way he grows up.
He then decapitates her, forces the severed head to perform fellatio on him, sets the head up on the fireplace mantle and uses it as a dartboard. He then rips the tongue and the larynx out and tries to stick them down the garbage disposal. The garbage disposal is having a hard time with the tough texture of the larynx and keeps spitting it out. He thinks that this is hilarious. Even the garbage disposal can't silence her. After he's finished with his mom, he calls his mom's best friend and invites her over. He has dinner with her before killing, dismembering, and raping her too. After this, he takes off. He gets a rental car and he makes his way to Colorado, only stopping for gas and soda. Once in Colorado, he calls the police and confesses to everything, and they don't believe him. Big Ed is a friend of his. They have long conversations. They've had several beers with him. They like Ed. But eventually, he convinces them, and he is arrested. During the interrogation, he confesses to everything. He tells them where all of the bodies are, where they can find all of the pieces, and this is when they really start to believe him. At some point, they actually give him a truth serum, and he confesses that he cannibalized pieces of his victims. Later, once he's not under the truth serum anymore, he says that that's not true, so I guess we'll never know. Only he will if he did actually cannibalize his victims. He was found guilty on 8 counts of first-degree homicide and was sentenced to life imprisonment for each count to be served consecutively. After sentencing, a journalist asked him how he felt now if he were to see a pretty girl. He replied with, well, half of me would want to date her, would want to take her out, and the other half wants to know what her head looks like on a stick. Edmund Kemper will serve the rest of his days in a California medical facility, and he is doing quite well. He reads books to the blind, he records himself reading books to the blind, he works with computers, and he avidly responds to fan mail. Maybe I should write him. Alright guys, that was the video for Edmund Kemper. I hope that you enjoyed it. He's kind of a favorite of mine. Now there is a lot more graphic detail to be found about his crime, but YouTube wouldn't like it very much if I went into detail. So I will link in the description below some places where you can go and find all the gory details for yourself. I will also link a couple of YouTube videos that have his full interviews throughout the years. He has a couple of them, one of the 80s, one of the 90s, and a recent one, I believe. I will link those below. I hope that you enjoyed this. I will see you in the next video. And remember that none of us are saints, and that I love you guys. Bye. See you next time.